All right, we're going to look at some critical approaches to reading and writing about literature. So, when we talk about critical approaches to literature, we're looking at different types of methods in which we are analyzing literary works and ways in which we're looking at it. Cultural approaches, political, socioeconomic approaches, all kinds of different ones. And the goal here is to be able to add different layers to the ways in which you are reading a work and talking about the work. These approaches, I want you to be very cognizant and mindful of them because I want you to use these approaches to the works as we move forward. Oftentimes, especially with our narrative, when we talk about the novel, what I'm going to want you to do is tell me which one of these approaches you want to use to approach the novel itself. Okay, let me get into it and see how, and let me just get into it and then we'll go from there. Okay, take a look at the vocabulary. As you can tell, the vocabulary words are the different approaches in which you would talk about a work. Okay, let's see here. First and foremost, political and socioeconomic approaches. When we talk about Charles Dickens' Hard Times, let me get back into that book. Charles Dickens' Hard Times. What do you know? We were just talking about this. Key concepts for socio and political economic approaches to examining literature. We want to look at power structures. We want to look at class struggles, economic systems, social inequalities like Beloved. Majority of Toni Morrison's have that in there. Again, Charles Dickens, when we talk about the Christmas Carol, we know the story. Obviously, there are class struggles between Scrooge and his employees and so forth. So when we're talking about political and socioeconomic approaches, you want to focus on how the literature itself reflects these particular challenges or reinforces certain political ideologies or economic systems, right? Definitely in all of these economic systems, as well as different types of social inequalities. These are the things you want to be looking for when you're talking about the key concepts of political and socioeconomic approaches to literature. Gotcha. Okay. There's some different types of examples that you can use. There's the Marxist criticism. That focuses on class struggle, right? Class struggle, economic forces, or maybe even material conditions. Remember the Christmas story? Material conditions that shape the characters and the narrative. What perspective is it coming from? Remember, we were talking about the different ways you could look at Charles Dickens. If you're upper class, if you're lower middle class, however it is, how are you talking about the work? And when we're looking at the type of social class of the narrator of the work, not the author, but the narrator of the work, how are the characters being shaped by these socioeconomic conditions? Okay. Again, when we talk about Charles Dickens, if we looked at it through a Marxist type of lens, you'd explore how the capitalist industrial system impacts the lives of the working class characters. How do these affect the characters, these socioeconomic or political approaches come to this? You can also look at class struggle, in which we investigate in literature how literature addresses these themes, whether it's poverty. Again, it's in all these books: poverty, exploitation, wealth disparity. I guess we could say The Great Gatsby does that too, right? Anywho, yes, so that is the political and socioeconomic approaches to literature. You want to apply those particular arguments to the work itself, and how are you seeing it within the work? Okay. Feminist and queer approaches, we look at the key concepts of focusing on gender, on sexuality, and those particular power dynamics within literature. What does that look like? These approaches will critique how maybe gender roles are played. Oftentimes in books within these times, again, I'm pulling these up just because they're probably, I've got a lot more different options, but these definitely will have those in there. Maybe when we think about, I'm trying to think of how you could do that in this one. Sexual identities, more like gender roles here, a little bit of gender roles, maybe some sexuality within that. Understanding heteronormative structures and how they're portrayed in these things. Like how, when we talk about heteronormative, we're talking about, being straight versus being gay, and how the heteronormative type of dialogue either persuades the character or moves the characters throughout the reading. And just being very mindful of that sort of thing as you're reading these works. Those are just some of the key concepts. Understanding, again, how the genders roles play. Like when we, Wild Meat and the Bully Burgers, we talk about Lovey. And Lovey, when she gets her period, all of a sudden she's now seen as a woman. And how does that change how her father sees her, or how she perceives the father to see her? The father does make some comments that tells you that there is a change because she's now a woman, right? So you could use maybe that kind of, maybe a little bit of a feminist criticism towards that particular situation in the book. Anyway, feminist criticism, if we're going to talk about that, we're exploring how literature reflects or perpetuates patriarchal gender norms. Again, very, very obvious in Wild Meat and the Bully Burgers. How there's the marginalization of women. Toni Morrison always has those, of course. And the representation of the female experience. Oftentimes when I share the chapter Rags with from Lois Yamanaka's Wild Meat and the Bully Burgers, people get a little uncomfortable because they don't really want to hear what it's like to have the female experience. I think it's incredibly important, and this is why we're going to talk about this when we talk about the literary canon, how we need these diverse voices. So works from Sylvia Plath, like The Bell Jar, or even Virginia Woolf's A Room of One's Own, frequently analyzed through feminist views. Anytime you hear Sylvia Plath or Virginia Woolf, you know there's going to be some feminist points in there. And that's why they're so powerful within the feminist view. If you go to my lectures, anytime you see something that is a link, go to it. Always go to it. It goes to the work itself. Even if, like, we've got like James Baldwin linked in there, that goes straight to their work. So go in, click the work. It's going to also show you, remember we talked about voice and style, right? That's the thing. You're going to see whether or not there's imagery. You're going to see all kind of form, how they're being written. I want you to be taking a look at the works that I'm posting in here, not only because the ones that I link here are going to show you where there's that feminist voice within this particular thing, but it's also going to show you the different types of writing that we're looking at. Anyway, I see that because the links are there. We also have, for the feminist and queer approaches, we actually have the queer approach, or the queer theory, which focuses on, again, non-normative sexualities. I don't know if I like that term, non-normative. I don't like that. I'm realizing those are not the right words I want to use. I don't like the word normal, because what the F is normal? You know what? I might have to fix that as we move forward. I think with queer theory, we're going to do just sexualities in general. I don't like the idea of non-normative. That just tells, that's no. I'm going to argue that. And it's even in my notes. And I'm like, why is it in there? Anyway, when we talk about queer theory, we're also talking about identities. We're talking about relationships. We're talking about challenging heteronormativity and exploring the fluidity of gender and sexuality, and sexual identity, right? What does that look like? Who's out there making these points? You can take a look at Jeanette Winterson. She's in there, Winterson, sorry, and James Baldwin. They will give you some examples of what that looks like for application of the queer theory. Geographical approaches. It's really important to recognize that where a story takes place is very important, right? Whether it is written for the South, maybe it's written for, is it an urban, is it a urban setting? Is it in the United States? Is it in Europe? Like, where's the setting in which this particular story or poem or whatever is taking place? We need to recognize that a place will shape the story. The place the space and the environment. So when we talk about geographical, we're not just talking about the fact that it's in New York, but where in New York? Is it in an apartment complex? Is it in a bodega? Is it on the outskirts of New York City? Is it in New York, north? I don't know, right? Like that, whatever that part of the story, wherever it's taking place, it's really important because that will influence the characters. That influences the story itself. So when we talk about geographical approaches, place, space, environment. Okay. So with this, oftentimes the perspective will focus on regionalism, kind of like when we talk about someone from California versus someone from maybe Texas, instantly you might have already a preconceived notion of the type of person that it might be based on regionalism, where the influence of where they are from. Okay. It will impact someone's cultural identity or maybe the dynamics between maybe urban and rural. What does that look like? Because you might find someone from Northern California completely different from someone from Southern California, right? And what is that doing to the story, to the characters, to the influence of what's happening to the plot or whatever. Okay. Regionalism, if we're going to talk about that as an example, it focuses on the unique cultural and social characteristics of a particular geographic area. Living in or by the beach will probably have that person, that story, that environment will probably have a different influence on the story versus someone who's living in the mountains. Even though they're both in the same state, the region will matter, right? It matters where they are set. We talk about the Grapes of Wrath. I don't have that one out here right now. Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. It's probably behind me. Oh, it's Cannery Row. Anyway, I also, again, a link there. If you click on it, it'll take you to the Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck when he talks about the Dust Bowl. Okay. The Dust Bowl era and the socioeconomic struggles of the migrant workers in the American West, right? We're talking about the Dust Bowl being within a particular region and the influence of that. Okay, we talk about eco-criticism, and that is where it often overlaps the ecological criticism, which focuses on the betrayal of nature and the environment in literature. Ecofeminism, do I have that book? Ecofeminism. Anywho, I have that book somewhere. Ecofeminism is an entire writing about that particular subject. Anyway, I guess it doesn't really matter because I don't have you reading it in class. Anyway, eco-criticism, again, is really talking about the portrayal of nature. Oh, what do I have here? Touch the Earth. I think we could apply eco-criticism to this particular book. The Touch the Earth. A self-portrait of Indian existence. I definitely believe that would apply to that. Okay. Next, we have ethnic and cultural approaches, where we have criticism that focuses on literature and reflects the experiences of a particular ethnic or cultural group, which emphasizes the issues of identity, racism, and cultural heritage. Toni Morrison is amazing for that. Bluest Eye is like the most heartbreaking of all of them. Where is it? Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. Read it. It is probably one of my it's my favorite, but it's also brutal. Understanding of what it means to be black and what that does to. We got the feminine in there too, right? Anyway. Here, we talk about African American criticisms. We're going to use that as an example. Analyzes literature by and about African Americans, exploring the issues of race and identity. Oh, this one's so, Anyway, and sexuality and gender roles. All of it is in this particular book. And the history, obviously, that's in here too. I've linked Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man. If you want to take a click on that one, that'll give you more another example. These are pretty much. I think I do have Bluest Eye linked in one of our things at some point. I'm pretty sure I do. But if you ever want it, message me and we'll try and find to get you a copy of it. Anyway, post-colonial studies often intersects the cultural criticism, examining legacies of colonialism in literature by authors from colonized regions, and that would be, I'm working on Gone with the Wind. I think that would be a really good example of it in some ways, not wholly, but a part of what it looks like, kind of. Chinua Achebe is a good one here. Things Fall Apart. Oh, I spelled that wrong. Things Fall Apart. Yeah, so Chinua Achebe, Things Fall Apart, and let's see here. Who else? Arundhati Roy. Arundhati Roy is a good one too. The God of Small Things. I have a link on there as well. So those two would be really good post-colonial examples. Not always is it the writing that is linked. Sometimes it's the author, but the author, if it's linked, that means it's still the reading or the work from them. Anyway, so those are some examples to pull from. I choose Toni Morrison. I read when I was in my second master's, whatever, school. And for me, they were very powerful, impactful examples, I think, of when we're looking at ethnic and cultural approaches. Historical approaches, very obvious here. You want to take a look at the historical context, analyzing the historical events that happen in this time. Again, Gone with the Wind, we know the historical concepts. We also recognize that in reading that book, we know the historical context in which it was written. And because we understand the historical context in which it was written, as we are reading it, we're keeping that in mind. We're not taking it as a end-all be-all how it should be. We recognize, again, the racism and the dialogue in that book has a historical context to some extent. So, I know, trust me. Anyway, it's taking me a long time to get through this book. Okay, we also understand that maybe there's certain types of movements or ideologies that influence maybe the narrative or the themes of it. You could use the historical concepts to apply to post-colonial studies. You can do the same for queer theory, for feminist movements, like the historical context, the approaches. You can, again, synthesis, right? You can apply more than one to a book to help understand why this book is important for its time, for our time, for whatever movement was going on during the writing of that book. Okay, the whole point of this approach, which you're going to see pretty much all the analytical reviews I have are going to have a cultural and a historical approach, because I want you to be able to pull from the background and go, oh, that's why. That makes sense. Anyway, the goal here is to understand how the cultural, political, and social conditions of the time influenced these writers. Because a lot of these books were written way ahead of their time. When you think of Mary Shelley and Frankenstein, like so far ahead of her time, which is why it was really hard to get her work out, because she was a woman. And if you look back at the time in which she wrote it, okay. All right, examples, we could talk about historical materialism, which investigates how literature reflects or engages in the material conditions or the social structures of its time. I have it here somewhere, but George Orwell's 1984. I have a link to it here. Read it at your own risk, because you're going to look at it and be like, are we there now? Right? It was actually a book written about 1984, meaning it was written about the future if you look at the original. Anyway, so we could take a look at George Orwell's 1984 and compare it to totalitarianism, words, and the historical context of post-World War II politics. I'm curious to know how that application of it, not just in that historical context, but our current time, how you could compare the two and the timeline, like from when he wrote it with the assumption that it was going to happen in 1984 as it happening in 2025. Like, what does that look like? I'm just saying that would be an excellent approach to take for 1984. So anyway, We can also look at cultural history and events such as war, revolution, social change, things like that, how they shape the literary experience. There's so much, especially now as history is doing like a pendulum swing, if that makes sense. It was like this, and now it kind of like seems like it's going back. How might that be changing how we're looking at maybe literature? I don't know. All right. Ecological approaches. When we look at the key concepts here, we're looking at the relationship between literature and environment. Okay. Ecofeminism. I wish I knew where that book was. I know it's in here somewhere. Sorry to waste your time, but I've been trying to look for that book for a while now. Anyway, we're looking at how nature, animals, and the environment are represented in the literature and how their representations reflect usually a critique of humanity, and their relationship to the natural world. I'm trying to think, what's the book where he is in the boat with the tiger? I know it, I have it. Life of Pi. Life of Pi. Obviously, the tiger in the boat's kind of a big deal. I couldn't really finish much of the book because I got motion sick. That's how good the book is, because they're in an ocean most of the time. I think that could be a good application of understanding maybe ecological approach using the tiger as symbolism. Anyway, it's more of an animal, but you can see nature in just about anything. That's the cool thing about when you start reading and you start looking at these different approaches and you're reading, you're like, ooh, I see that now. It's tough because oftentimes when nature or animals are involved in literature, sometimes we glaze over it. Is that not a social commentary right there? What does it mean that as humans, when we're seeing our relationship to the natural world, oftentimes we stomp over it or glaze over it? Anyway, Henry David Thoreau, he has, is it Walden? I think I use, so Walden is one of his books, and I believe I use, it's more political, but it's socioeconomic. Walden. Can I already pull it? Walden. Anyway, whatever. Civil Disobedience is one of the works that I have linked there. Oh, I did have it after all. Walden. Civil Disobedience. This is a great nature. Anytime you hear nature writing, this is your guy. Everybody goes to this one. Worth taking a look at. I believe Walden Thoreau. Wait, Walden Emerson Walden. Walden's poem. Let's see here. Oh, Ralph Waldo Emerson. Sorry, it's Ralph Waldo Emerson's house. That's why the name Walden is in there. You're going to notice often my confusion comes from many authors work with other authors and their works sometimes, cross over. There is in Supermarket in California, one of the poems we're going to read. Literally, he talks about, I believe, Ralph Waldo Emerson. I can't remember. Anyway, there's a lot of crossovers, especially in the beatnik era. They do a lot of that too, where they will utilize each other's work in it's kind of like fan fiction, but not fan fiction, if that makes sense. Anyway, also you're going to see Rachel Carson in there. Please take a look at that. Maybe I do have ADD. I'm sorry. You get it. We're here. Anyway, environmental justice. We're still in ecological approaches. It focuses on literature that addresses the ecological issues such as global warming, deforestation, and often with marginalized indigenous peoples. Very, very, very much. You're going to hear a lot of that. You might hear more so now than before as the voices start to get a little bit louder, as they are able to get a little bit louder, especially with Drill Baby Drill. If we're not drilling in the ocean, we're pretty much drilling on indigenous land. So, or what is left of said land. So anyway, I don't know how much work we have in class that relates to that. Usually I leave that kind of stuff to my English 2 class. Okay, my favorite approach is psychological, psychoanalytical. My heavens, guys. Psychoanalytical approaches to work is some of my favorites. I use some Freudian. He uses the Oedipus effect. We'll talk about that in a second. But Jung, Jung, Jung is another type of theorist that we would use. So we look at maybe how the Freudian theory or the Jungian theory might influence the characters, themes within the story, narrative structures reflecting the unconscious desire and fears and conflicts within the character. Y'all, they're everywhere. Where is it? Heavy AF. I don't even want to tell you what happens at the end because that is the psychoanalytical treasure trove right there. Anyway, so what I love about this is we really dive deep into why does the character do what the character does. So you will very easily psychoanalytical analysis is probably the easiest one to do in pretty much all of the works that we do for the most part, because you can really look into like why did they do what they do. Again, with culture and historical, they all just synthesize. Okay. A lot of this can also reflect on maybe the psychological aspects of the text itself, whether it's looking at repression. When we talk about the Oedipus complex, I think you all know, falling in love with the mother or the father, and the role of the unconscious storytelling. All right. I guess Oedipus, I don't know if we can apply that to Wild Meat and the Bully Burgers. I'm going to have to double check. I don't know if you could apply that, but you might see it in there. You might be able to, you might. Anyway, when we're talking about the Freudian analysis, we look at how repressed desires and psychological conflicts influence our characters. I mean, that is like screaming in Wild Meat and the Bully Burgers for sure. But you'll see that in some of our poems too. You can apply those if you would like. What else? With the Freudian analysis, when you look at Franz Kafka's The Metamorphosis, I was like just rereading that the other day. I was like, damn, it's so brutal. I think I cried. I'll be honest with you. And you'll be like, how did you cry? And that tells me maybe there's something Freudian going on my end. Psychoanalytical right there. So anyway, The Metamorphosis looks at themes such as guilt, alienation, family dynamics. There's a lot. And it's wild. When you read the first couple sentences, you're like, what is happening here? And then you go, oh, right? Is it metaphorical? Is it literal? What's the intent? Okay. You could really break that one apart. It's good. You can actually use Metamorphosis. We will be using in our short story options. So if you read it now, you can use it later. Jungian analysis focuses on archetypes and the collective unconscious, often analyzing mythical patterns in literature. Okay. I think we can apply that to this. A lot of Toni Morrison's work, actually. I think you could throw it in there. Okay, anyway. Post-colonial analysis. Here we go. Key concepts are analyzing literature from former colonies to examine the effects of colonialism on identity, culture, history, and it critiques ongoing legacies of imperialism and the struggle for independence and self-representation in literature. Post-colonial approaches, anything really can apply. Some of Toni Morrison's actually, I think, Beloved, it is set during colonial times, yet written post-colonial. There's some stuff going on in there. It's good. Beloved would be a good work for a post-colonial approach. You could see Salman Rushdie. He's got some good stuff. Gugiwa, let's see here. Gugiwa Tiangos is a good one. You'll see the names. Click on that. They're going to give you the reading. So Salman Rushdie, Gugiwa Tiangos, explore the compact of colonialism, obviously national identity. Salman Rushdie, do some research on him and his experience. I think recently he was stabbed during one of his readings, which has not kept him from writing, but has actually emphasized the work he is trying to do. A little bit of tidbit there. Also, when we talk about post-colonial, we think about the othering. In my other English 2 class, we talk a lot about what it means to othering, but most specifically to indigenous or colonized peoples. Um, Look at Heart of Darkness, which is. Where did I have that? I just had it. Heart of Darkness. Heart of Darkness. Is it over here? Heart of Darkness. Anyway, I had it here somewhere, and I pulled it out just for this. It is Conrad's. It's Toni Morrison. Toni Morrison. I have so many books, it's stupid. Anyway, I just had it. Heart of Darkness is another one that can really help you recognize what post-colonial writing looks like. Where is that? You must hate me. I don't blame you. Okay. I was going to show you what it looked like, so if you're curious, you could take a look at the work itself. Oh, here it is. It's one of the first ones I pulled up. Heart of Darkness. That's a good one. All the books fell. Anyway, and then Jean Rye's Wide's Sargasso Sea. Take a look at those as examples. Biological approaches. Here we're looking at how we are considering the author's personal experiences or their life experiences in a historical context and their personal beliefs as a lens through which they interpret their works. Maya Angelou is a big one. I know a lot of people reference her. I keep coming back to that. That's a good one. What else? Knowing the author's life can also provide insight into their themes, their contexts, their character, and sometimes their characters' experiences in their work. There was a writer recently who their work was pretty dark, and most people weren't recognizing the fact that the darkness within the work was actually personal experiences that they were applying. And when they found out, a lot of people actually kind of stepped back from the author because of. Anyway, sometimes the personal life, unfortunately, while it is helpful for the literature, it's my. How do I say this? It's kind of like Sherman Alexie in some of his work. It's his work that does apply to, it's his experiences that help him with his work. Like one of his works was Part-Time Indian. True Story of a Part-Time Indian was actually, it's a nonfiction, well, semi-nonfiction, kind of like David Starris. The whole point is, sorry guys, the whole point of this is that their experiences in life are what are influencing what they're writing about. And I didn't mean to go on a side tangent with that other author, but what was happening was her child was being treated in a very disrespectful way from this author's boyfriend, and when it came to light, the mother disowned the daughter but kept the boyfriend, and then the darkness that of what the boyfriend did to the daughter was still in the writing, and the mother didn't do anything. That was where I was trying to go with that. I was trying to not say things, but anyway, that's what we're talking about. How does their background and who they are influence their work? I could have said that a lot quicker. Mythological approaches is our next approach, and we're talking about certain types of myths or archetypes, and the different types of universal patterns in literature. You see this so often with the guy pushing up the rock, or you'll see like the hero's adventures, or look at any myth, and so often are those myths used in writing, very much so in things like Lord of the Rings and Star Wars. Those are our hero adventures. We can talk about how do these myths over time influence different types of ways in which we, different types of literature. I don't know if I really have anything here. Joseph Campbell's Monomyth, his writing analyzes the common structure of the hero's journey. How often are we seeing it? Pretty much everywhere. The old wise man. There's always some old wise man, right? Gandalf. We have the hero, Frodo. I guess we could say Frodo would be the hero. And then we have the shadows, right? We just think of all these ways in which these myths repeat themselves within literature, maybe just written in a different way. Archetypes identifies the reoccurring different types of characters. Again, very similar. You got the old wise man. You have maybe different types of symbols or motifs within literature, that sort of thing. So how are you seeing that from myths within the literature? And again, if you're a Star Wars fan or a Lord of the Rings fan, I mean, that's a great way of applying the myths to some of the work, if it helps you kind of remember. And then we're going to talk about real quick structuralist and post-structuralist approaches. This is very big. This is very heavy. If you don't use it in your work, I'm not going to be mad. If you want to take a next level to your work, you can. When we talk about structuralism and post-structuralism, obviously structuralism is the underlying structures that governs the actual narrative. And it's like, you know, binary opposition, life versus death, good versus evil, right? That's what we're talking about when we talk about structuralist. It's like there's a set structure to what good and evil looks like, or, you know, life and death looks like. That would be the structuralist view versus the post-structuralism, where there's the meaning is never fixed. If you were to argue some like a reading in the argument for a post-structuralist, you would argue that meaning is never fixed, but it is always open to interpretation. It is fluid. So you could make an argument that the Lord of the Rings, you can look at it from a structuralist point of view, meaning life, death, good, bad. You can make that very black and white. You might be able to come at it with a post-structuralist type of view by saying that it is very open to interpretation on how you see this, depending on how you want to approach the book itself. Is it just black? Is it just the, you know, life versus death? Is there more behind that? Is it more fluid? It's when we think about post-structuralism, it is a deconstruction theory trying to understand that some texts don't just mean one thing, they could mean multiple things, and things are fluid. I know that was kind of hard. I know that's like next level. If you want to go and apply structuralist or post-structuralist to something, absolutely, but I'm not going to be like looking for this one. It's a little bit harder. Anyway, the whole idea is the work, how are you approaching the work? Are you seeing it as only one way? Or can you say that this work can be looked at as fluid? Can Lord of the Rings be looked at as fluid? Can you find multiple interpretations? I could argue yes, absolutely. While there is the mythological theory that's behind it, that good, that evil, that life, that death sort of thing to it, I think there's a lot more behind it. To be honest, I'm a post-structuralist type of person, you know, when I'm looking at works. I think all things can be interpreted in different ways, and everything's open to interpretation in my point of view. But I'm also not the author of all these works, so who knows? Maybe there are some authors that are like, no, it's just this simple. So anyway, that was a long one, guys. But that's the whole point. I want you to have this available to you if you need to come back to it, when you need to understand these different types of approaches. And this is what I'm looking for in your work. Okay. All right, go ahead and take the test after. Once you do the quiz, I say test, I'm sorry. Quiz, whatever. Not whatever. Quiz. I must be mindful of my dialogue. Don't forget, you do also have a reading and lecture response. You are going to be using 3 different vocabulary words this time. And within your 10 sentences, again, I want you to tell me what stood out to you specifically. And how do you feel that this understanding of critical approaches, how do you feel we might be using this? I mean, I've already said it through the lecture. I guess if you need to, you know, reiterate what I said, that's fine. It just tells me you saw the lecture, I guess. But what I really want you to do is use one of the examples. Remember those little links within the lecture notes? I want you to use one example from the lecture notes to validate your points. So say you are using one of the vocabulary words as, you know, let me see here. I'm trying to think which one I want to use. Post-colonial approaches. And maybe the link to post-colonial approaches sent you to, you know, maybe a Toni Morrison link. You want to use one of those links to validate your point about post-colonial approaches. Does that make sense? What I'm trying to do here is I'm trying to get you like your hands wet and get used to applying the reading and the lecture that we're doing to the actual reading itself, the specific work that I'm having you click. So pick one of those names. Let me see if there's one that I'm going to give you a little bit more of an example to kind of help you out. So let's go to critical approaches. I'm going to give you a better example. So say you were to use one of the vocabulary words, political and socioeconomic approaches. There you have a link to Hard Times by Charles Dickens. Here, maybe you could say, you know, I mean, obviously you don't have to read the whole thing. I'm not asking you to read the whole thing, but maybe as you're just kind of scrolling through, something sticks out to you and you're like, oh, I could see how there's a class struggle here. Maybe the way you saw in one of the, one of the chapters that something stood out specifically to you. Like we have Mrs. Sparsit, and she's talking, and she's over here sipping her tea, right, with long sips. Maybe there's something about that behavior in how she's presenting herself that explains her socioeconomic status. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's a ploy, right? You tell me. Anyway, so you want to read one of the works. You could look at The Bell Jar from Sylvia Plath, and you can talk about maybe one of the feminist approaches that you see there. Maybe there's something there. The goal here is I want you to apply at least one of the readings or examples to the vocabulary. So I have the vocabulary as the approaches and 3 of them. You can be creative in how you use them, but I just want you to show me your understanding of what these approaches are, which is why I babbled on for like 40 minutes over it, because I'm trying to give you some examples. Okay, so use the examples from the work. Tell me how it applies to the approach. And again, don't use AI. Don't waste your time on that. Just show me what you learned. That's all I want you to do here. That's the goal, right? Don't waste my time. Don't waste your time. Just read the thing and show me what it means. If you want, you can always look at some of the, other works in some of the other modules if it's open. But try and use what we've got there. Anyway, I know that's a lot. I get it. Relax. We've got a rubric. The rubric tells you use the 3 vocabulary, 10 sentences that apply to the reading or to the questions, and then at least one example from the lecture. Okay. And then what's cool is you can just apply it and I will guide you. How does that help you? Like, that's the goal here. Apply it and I will say, I see what you did here. Here's a great way in how you would have been able to apply it even better. And that's what I'm here for. Okay. Doesn't have to be perfect. I just want you to show me what you learned. Okay. Losing my voice. I'm excited to read what you got. Take the quiz after and I'll see you on the other side.